Chapter 4. How Did It Get This Way? The Trap. When I was about 11 years old, I got slammed in the elbow with a baseball during a little league game. God, it hurt. I was I dropped the bat and clutched my elbow and started to cry. Hanging on to my elbow was bad enough, but the crying was too much for my dad. He yelled from behind the fence, "You're all right. Stop crying." My mother got up from her chair and came toward the fence, but Dad told her to leave me alone. He didn't leave me alone, though. He kept shouting at me to stop crying and take it like a man. I made myself let go of my elbow and took my base. I stared at the ground, hoping my dad wouldn't see under the bill of my helmet. Ron, who had been worried about thoughts of injuries, oh fuck, I gotta restart. I was reading like shit. Okay. Chapter 4. How did it get this way? When I was about 11 years old, I got slammed in the elbow with a baseball during a little league game. God, it hurt. I dropped the bat and clutched my elbow and started to cry. Hanging on to my elbow was bad enough, but the crying was too much for my dad. He yelled from behind the fence, "You're all right. Stop crying." My mother got up from her chair and came toward the fence, but Dad told her to leave me alone. He didn't leave me alone, though. He kept shouting at me to stop crying and take it like a man. I made myself let go of my elbow and took my base. I stared at the ground, hoping my dad couldn't see under the bill of my helmet. Ron, who had been worried about thoughts of injuring his wife, told Randy this story during a counseling session. Most of us can identify with Ron's story. We all remember times when we were shamed into trying to be more manly, even if we were only 11 years old. These efforts by our parents and coaches were effective in teaching us that boys don't cry, and they also made it difficult for us to express any kind of pain or fear without feeling like a loser. Ron's family was typical in many ways. His mother worked half time at the local library, and his father was a bookkeeper for a furniture factory. While his father rarely shouted and was never physically abusive, he made the major decisions in the family without much input from his wife. Ron had two sisters, Adele, 2 years younger, and Mary, 3 years older. Ron was the only boy. My dad didn't ignore Mary and Adele, but it was always clear that they were the girls and should do things with Mom, Ron recalled. He would praise them for being pretty or getting good grades or for helping Mom. After dinner, we'd leave the table, and he'd always tell them to help her clean up. I thought that's the way things were supposed to be. Ron's father took him camping, practiced in his Boy Scout activities, or participated in his Boy Scout activities, and helped him with school projects. But there was a price to pay for his attention. His dad was a demanding perfectionist, and Ron rarely did things up to his standards. His father would praise a B plus on Mary's report card, but question why the same grade on Ron's report card wasn't an A. Adele wasn't reprimanded if she cried when she fell off the swing, but Ron couldn't remember a time when it was okay for him to cry. Not, If I did something that he didn't like or that wasn't good enough, he would hiss at me. Control yourself. You've got to control yourself to do your best. But crying or showing fear was the worst thing I could do in his eyes. Ron paused as a memory washed over him. Fear or crying only showed that I wasn't in control of myself and was acting like a girl. When he was really mad, he'd make me feel bad by saying that Adele would make a better son than me. Ron was pelted with these contradictory messages throughout his boyhood. On one side, his father tried to turn him into a man by shaming him and making him feel that nothing he did was ever good enough. Ron's father believed that bullying his son in this way would toughen him up. On the other side was the message that simply by being male, he was better than his sisters. The two messages combined to form an ugly threat. If you don't measure up, then you're weak, like a girl. Ron isn't alone. From the moment we are born until our deaths, we are bombarded with messages about what it takes to be a man. As infants, we are bounced more and cuddled less than baby girls. Our mothers coo to us less, and our fathers tend to play more roughly with us. We get kicked off our parents' laps much sooner than our sisters do. As we get older, we are hit from all sides with advice, threats, and insinuations about how to measure up by parents, siblings, cousins, uncles, girlfriends, teachers, coaches, neighbors, other boys, television, songs, pro sports stars, movies, ads, video games. You get the idea. Male socialization. The process of turning a boy into a man as if he wouldn't grow up to be a man on his own is called male socialization. Every society, now and in the past, socializes its children. Boys and girls are taught how to behave so that they can fit in with other people. A society functions smoothly when most of its members agree most of the time to follow certain rules and ways of behaving. Most of us pay our taxes, follow street signs, and dress and eat in ways that don't shock our neighbors. Socialization varies from one society to another. Westerners don't eat fried dog meat for dinner, for example, but such a meal would be acceptable in Korea or China, where people are socialized to use dogs as a source for food. Socialization concerns itself with the needs of a society, not with the needs of the individuals who make up that society. Serious problems arise when the socialization process strips individuals of some of the abilities they need to function as well adjusted human beings. This is what happened to Ron. Male socialization process taught him to deny physical pain and emotional vulnerability, to be powerful and in control at all times, to be bigger, stronger, and smarter than girls, to devalue anything that hinted at girl behavior. Many of these lessons focused on denying physical and emotional pain and maintaining control of himself and the situation around him. Expressing emotion was for mothers and sisters, and Ron learned to ignore his feelings. Eventually, Ron lost the ability to feel much at all except anger and frustration. He was unaware of the deep pool of shame and fear that made him worry constantly that he wouldn't measure up, wouldn't be successful, and wouldn't be a real man. Ron quickly became conscious of that shame and fear when he lost his job as a regional manager during a downsizing at the grocery store chain he worked for. The loss of his job ate at Ron because he mistakenly believed that by working hard and contributing to the company's profitability, he could avoid being laid off. In fact, Ron, who was consistently competitive and hardworking, had done everything right to keep his job. But his boss was told to lay off 4 employees, and he chose seniority as the easiest way to make the cuts. Although Ron had been there for 8 years, some of the other managers had been there far longer. At home, Ron struggled with the fact that he had lost his role as breadwinner. Leslie, his wife, tried to be supportive, but everything she said began to grate on Ron. He yelled at her that she was stupid when she brought up the idea of getting a job herself. He got even angrier when Leslie mentioned that he could seek the help of an employment counselor. Ron finally sought help from Randy when he recognized that he did not know how to behave without being abusive. "I'm just on the edge," he said carefully. "I almost slapped her the other night. I'm afraid I'm going to do something to her that I'll regret." Losing his job did not cause Ron to be abusive any more than drinking causes domestic violence. As long as he was employed and maintained control at home, Ron's world was fairly stable, but being laid off made him feel robbed of a job that was rightfully his. His loss of his job tilted the balance of control away from Ron and increased the stress from the hidden anger, fear, and shame that gnawed at him since his boyhood socialization into manhood. As his control at work vanished, Ron felt a need to gain more control at home. The Act Like a Man box. In his book Men's Work, sociologist and author Paul Kivel uses an exercise called the Act Like a Man box to depict the socialization process that boys endure. You can make a version of this box yourself. Draw a square on a sheet of paper and list inside all the traits and characteristics you can think of that boys learn are desirable in men. When he was 6 or 7 years old, Ron's box would have included words and phrases like brave, tough, doesn't act like a girl, doesn't cry. Until he was 8 or 9, these were the words or suggestions Ron heard that described how men are supposed to act. As he grew older, Ron heard more messages. Most of them weren't very subtle. By the time he was a teenager, Ron's box would have added in words like fearless, independent, in control, strong, competitive, unemotional, stoic, able to score. The last entry, able to score, was wishful thinking for some guys, but it was nonetheless a characteristic that was considered necessary to be a real man. From the teen years through the beginning of old age, men receive constant messages from other men and from popular culture that they are supposed to be able to get women to have sex with them. When Ron first began counseling, his box had a few added terms. The words in your box won't be identical to Ron's, of course, but they would have had the same underlying goal of turning you into a man when you were a boy. Now that you are a man, the purpose of the words is to keep you inside the box. You know the image of an ideal man because you've heard the same messages Ron did. For the generations after World War II, he was made popular by the characteristics portrayed by John Wayne, such as cowboy, war hero, submarine captain. The real man was the rugged individualist without permanent family ties, although he could always get a woman if he wanted one. Later, he was Superman, Rambo, Dirty Harry, and the Marlboro Man. Today, some of his traditional roles remain popular, like cowboy and soldier, but the man in the box is also characterized by sports heroes, rap artists, and violent video game characters. The words inside the box describe a warped male ideal. There's certainly nothing wrong with being strong, tough, brave, or capable. Instead, the problem with the words inside the box is that they severely limit a man's life. These masculine words restrict both experiences and emotions. They make life one dimensional. Because they are so limiting, some boys and men get outside the box to live life more fully. A few of the terms that might describe them are listed on the left side of the box below. This includes nurturing, uncertain, emotional, artistic, vulnerable, creative, sensitive, loving, dependent, flexible. The boy or man who risks stepping outside the box by showing some of the characteristics listed at the left side also risks being called names. You already know these names, you've heard them before. You usually don't say them unless you want to insult another man, or perhaps tease him. Dare to step outside the box, and you will be belittled by all the terms commonly used to shame a boy or a man who violates these male code the box describes. If, like Ron as a boy, your 11-year-old son cries when he's struck on the elbow by a baseball during a little league game, he'll be called names such as sissy, fag, mama's boy, girl, wimp, crybaby, scared, queer, wuss. The list might not be endless, but it's long. You may have called him some of these names yourself. Kivel's point is unmistakable. If you want to be a man, you must stay inside the box and live according to the characteristics listed there, because showing fear or emotion has traditionally been considered unmasculine in our society. Any boy or man who displays such weaknesses is asking to be shamed back into the box. The words on the right side of the box above can twist a boy's guts until he feels physically ill. They can gnaw at his heart and erode his faith in himself. A deep, lasting injury is created through the process of male socialization that a man carries with him. What happens to a boy who's called names like these? Too often, in addition to making him feel rotten, he is treated differently by his peers. The words at the bottom of the box below describe what happens to the boy who doesn't fit into the box. There we have left out, beat up, picked on, chosen last, bullied, harassed, not invited. Anyone subjected to such treatment has to find some means of coping. Many of the men we see who have been convicted of domestic abuse harbor deep feelings of anger and resentment that they sometimes are not even aware of. Listed at the top of the box below are ways in which men typically respond or act out. There we have depression, revenge, violence, isolation, avoidance, substance abuse, hypermasculinity. Notice that the words on the right side of the box have something strikingly in common. They are primarily effeminate terms that convey a clear message: stop being feminine, start being masculine, and get the hell back in the box. This is the crux of male socialization, the male code: act like a man. We live up to the male code by fighting to prove toughness, engaging in high risk behaviors to show fearlessness, and seeking sexual conquest to confirm our heterosexuality and sexual prowess. We become very aware of pecking order, whether we are keeping track of who caught the biggest fish or sank the most baskets, or who's the best machinist, attorney, salesman in our work group. Our socialization may prepare us for limited roles and success in society, but at a terrible price. The box does little to prepare us for intimate relationships. The box tells us to be in control, deny emotions, be invulnerable, and compete, while intimacy requires us to be respectful, emotionally engaged, vulnerable, and loving. As men, we long for companionship, security, and love, but we approach our intimate relationships with skills that lead to control, conflict, loneliness, and abuse. We sacrifice half our humanity to reach the pinnacle of masculinity. Just a girl. Because this sacrifice requires that we devalue feminine characteristics such as empathy, nurturing, and listening skills, we also have to devalue our wives and girlfriends. According to the myth of male superiority, they are, after all, just girls. Their devaluation is the logical outcome of traditional male socialization, which teaches boys that they are better and more important than girls. It also teaches boys that they need to control themselves or the situation around them. As Ron learned, this can be a formula for domestic abuse. In counseling with Randy, Ron learned that his sense of self-worth hinged on his ability to be in control. He had learned his boyhood lessons well. He controlled his feelings. He rarely showed anger uh, he rarely showed anger outwardly and was only occasionally affectionate with Leslie and their two children. For the most part, his family went along with what he wanted, so he felt in control at home. As long as he worked hard, he believed he could control his work environment enough to protect his job. But the company downsizing was out of his control, and the depression and feelings of worthlessness that followed his layoff also seemed to be beyond his control. Ron found himself in a downward spiral, first lashing out at Leslie verbally, and finally worried that he might hit her. Randy and Ron worked together to harness the best parts of Ron's strict self-discipline while helping him recognize and accept two partial truths. First, no man can be in total control of himself and his world all the time. Second, not being in total control doesn't mean that the world will fly into pieces and the man will be exposed as being less than a man. More important, Ron began to understand the root of his impulse to take out his feelings of shame and fear on Leslie by abusing her. Ron had been taught for years, both at home and in the world outside his home, that boys were better than girls and women should comfort and support men. Above all, men should be in control. It never crossed Ron's mind to slug the manager who signed his pink slip, but his impulse to hit Leslie was very strong and seemed to come out of nowhere. Why? Without consciously thinking about it, Ron believed Leslie was not as good as he was and deserved to bear the brunt of his shame, anger, and fear over losing his job. Ron almost slipped into violence, not because he lost his job, but because he had never been forced to consider his underlying beliefs about women. In his mind, it was Leslie's job to comfort and sustain him, and she wasn't measuring up to the task. Ron certainly wasn't to blame for an upbringing that stressed male control and superiority, but he was responsible for his behavior as an adult. To Ron's credit, he chose his love for his wife and family and began counseling with Randy rather than indulging his own fears and insecurities and blaming Leslie for his problems. Not everyone gets the flu. When the flu season arrives, many people sail through without being touched by a single sniffle. Their muscles don't ache, they don't have a fever, and they can show up for work. Other people may suffer a few symptoms and feel under the weather for several days, but a few exposed to the same germs spend a miserable week in bed. In the same way, almost all boys in society are exposed to the same sorts of trauma by male socialization, but they do not all grow up to be violent and abusive. Men like Ron lose their jobs every day, but not all of them turn to domestic violence. Why would Ron think of harming Leslie, while other men might accept their wives' support and encouragement? There is no clear answer to this question other than the obvious fact that we are all different and respond in different ways to the same stimulus. For boys who grow up with low self esteem and shame, buying into the tenets of the act like a man box prop them up with a false sense of power, control, and security. Control and power over a woman can temporarily compensate for feelings of powerlessness and shame they chronically experience in life. Ron was susceptible to his father's bullying attempts to turn him into a man, and he felt deeply shamed when he failed to live up to his father's expectations. Providing for his family was an expectation that Ron adopted from his father, and it was a non negotiable issue. Either you made a comfortable living or you were less than a man. Other men who were socialized in similar ways might feel superior to women, and they probably feel rotten if they lose their jobs, but they never hit their wives. Being exposed to a bug doesn't mean you are doomed to suffer the flu, even if everyone around you gets sick. Winning at work, losing at home. The male socialization process almost always involves shaming or bullying boys while at the same time instilling the false belief of male superiority. Some boys are also encouraged to accept another false belief that they are superior not only to girls but to just about everyone else. Such distorted thinking forms the basis of grandiosity, that is, an inflated sense of self confidence and self worth. A middle school boys' baseball team loses by 12 runs, but his father tells him they were only having a bad day. The other team just got lucky. If the rest of his team has played well as he did, surely they would have won. A fourth grade boy is frequently in trouble at school. His report card grades are exclusively C's and D's. Yet his father beams with pride while watching him play basketball, proclaiming that his son is all boy. Both parents praise his academic efforts. His father tells him he doesn't have to suck up to his teacher, that is, behave in class, just to get better grades. His mother assures him, "We know you're smarter than those other kids. You just get bored in school, don't you?" A handsome, popular high school junior has one attractive girlfriend after another. He rarely finishes projects and chores he has promised to do. He is frequently teased by his father in a good natured way. "You've got it made, son. The guys like you and the girls can't keep their hands off you. Remember, it's not what you do that counts so much as whether people like you." The result of such distorted thinking aren't difficult to imagine. Boys like the ones in the examples above tend to grow into men who turn a blind eye to the realities of failure and who always think they are right, no matter what the situation. They tend to blame others. After all, they can't be at fault themselves, and think it is their right to be aggressive and controlling those around them. A grandiose man with an exaggerated sense of self worth often has difficulty seeing himself and others realistically. He is offended when the world doesn't go his way, and he sometimes strikes back at perceived insults and injustices. That's what happened to Charlie's client, John. John's dad was quite different from Ron's father. Ron was taught to control his emotions and do well in school, but his father never pushed him to excel in athletics or to take on the neighborhood boys. Nor did Ron receive the message that he was better than everyone else. John's father, in contrast, encouraged John to stand up for himself with other boys and not let his girlfriend tell him what to do. John's dad told him that he should never let others push him around because that would only show that John was inferior, like a girl. John spent his boyhood swinging between grandiosity and shame, at times thinking he was the cock of the wall, and at other times living in fear that he would be found to be weak and inferior. He always told me, "Don't let them push you around. You're better than they are, and they need to know it." John related this boyhood training one evening in a group. "Who were they?" asked Charlie. Did he mean particular people or just the world in general? John thought for a moment. "Well, not the whole world, but just about everyone I knew. Other guys on the football team, my friends, even my teachers." He'd say that just because they knew a little more than I did didn't make them any better than me. John thought for oh sorry. John strutted through high school. He antagonized his teachers, irritated his coaches, and kept only those friends who would go along with him. From the outside, he appeared successful. He had a pretty girlfriend, guys to hang out with, and was the football team's star running back. Often he got away with misbehavior because of his status on the team. The coach would persuade teachers to look the other way when John was late, didn't turn in homework, or challenge them. As a result, John didn't learn much about being accountable for his actions. After high school, he worked construction for several years. He saved as much money as he could and eventually started his own flooring business or roofing business. By the time he was 34, John had a regular crew of 10 people, and when weather permitted, he hired subcontractors. His aggressive bullying style made few friends, but his projects were completed on time and his customers were usually satisfied. John shrugged off the workers' dislike as the cost of doing business. I don't go to work to have guys like me, he explained. I go to make sure they do the job right. Sometimes I have to be a little hard on them. Because John knew for only because John knew only one way of dealing with people, he carried his attitude home with him. He frequently told Jessica, his longtime girlfriend, how to improve her performance at work and how she should do things around their house. Jessica tried to follow his directions, and when she didn't, John could easily intimidate her by raising his voice and shaking her slightly. He always insisted that he had her best interests at heart and only wanted to help her be as successful as possible. One evening, after John criticized an important decision Jessica had made at work, she finally blew up at him. John didn't see her resentment as a result of his interference on a subject he knew little about. Instead, he thought Jessica was acting disrespectfully. This was one thing John couldn't stand. He began pushing Jessica across the crowded living room, and when she shouted at him to stop, he responded by slapping her repeatedly. The abuse stopped when Jessica lost her balance and struck her head on a sharp corner of a glass coffee table. John was instantly apologetic, although he thought the injury was her own fault, and Jessica assured him she was okay. When she could get to her cell phone alone, Jessica called the police. Charlie recalls that John was stunned not only by Jessica's disrespect, but also by what John saw as betrayal by calling the police after he assaulted her. His exaggerated belief in his own self-worth had been challenged, but it was never seriously shaken. Eventually, John learned to stop shaking and pushing Jessica, and he even stopped raising his voice to scare her, Charlie says. But he never made the connection between his boyhood experiences and his violent behavior. He just couldn't let go of the idea that Jessica should obey him because he knew better than she did, regardless of the subject. And he certainly never figured out that his violence grew out of an overwhelming fear that her standing up to him would make him less of a man. In other words, John remained trapped in a confining box from his boyhood that dictated not only how he should behave, but how others should behave as well. Jessica eventually grew tired of life within the trap, and she left John less than a year after he pushed her into the coffee table. Escaping the trap. The way out of controlling and abusing others is by embracing our full humanity. We need to blast the box of false masculinity into outer space. We are not islands or rocks unto ourselves, entitled to control others for our benefit. We are humans who may have had half our humanity squashed in the name of manliness. Fight back. We can reclaim our compassion, love, and respect for others. We can have feelings, admit mistakes, communicate, let go of control, while all the same time maintaining our masculinity. In fact, a real man is a man of integrity, compassion, respect, and courage, not just the kind of weekend courage and compassion that let him climb a ladder to build a house for Habitat for Humanity, but the kind of steady daily courage it takes to step outside the box, withstand the potential mockery, and do the right thing. Love and respect his partner without control and abuse. No man is ever to blame for his upbringing and the male socialization process that he experienced as a boy, but he is always responsible for his behavior as an adult.